Okay, good morning, everybody. I was muted, I didn't realize that. I know you want to do that to me all the time anyway.
I know.
Hey, Jeff, sorry about that. My electricity went out.
Not your fault, don't worry about it. Want to welcome everybody this morning to the meeting. We're going to call the meeting now as it is past the designated time. Would take, even though we can't do the Pledge of Allegiance, so it would take another moment of silence and those we've lost to the COVID virus. Thank you. Okay, with that, I'm going to go through a roll call. Make sure we've got all the board members. So, Jen Lipdak, I see you there. Ann O'Gorick.
Here.
Okay, Michelle, I see you there. John, I see you there. Austin Davis. Austin,
yes, I'm here.
Great,
yes,
thanks.
I'm here.
Jim Brewster.
Here.
Thank you. Jessica Wells Laval.
Here.
Thank you. Jerry Dawn. Oh, there you are. I see you, Jerry. Okay. And I know Lori is unavailable today. And Stephanie Terman, you're there?
Yes,
yeah.
Here.
Okay. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody. Okay. All right, with that, and then just, when we go through the approvals again, I'll call on people to make motions in seconds, so we're not stepping over each other. First order of business is approval of the minutes of the February 26th regular meeting. I have a motion for that approval. Jen, can you make that motion?
So moved.
John, can you second it?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, those minutes are approved. And with that, we'll move on to the report of our CEO, Catherine Kellerman.
Thank you, Chair Letwin, and good morning, everybody who is joining us virtually and here at Port Authority. As many of you know, we lost our fourth Port Authority family member to COVID-19 last month. In addition to being a wonderful coworker, John Majeski was a beloved husband, father, grandfather, and brother. And I have received so many emails with people sharing stories about his kindness and going out of his way to help them. It's been a touching reminder of how important he is, and also poignant to observe this at the time of his loss. Our thoughts continue to be with his family and the families of each of the employees we've lost to this horrible virus. May we please have a moment of silence for John and operators Gregory Criolla and James Bieri, and maintenance trainer Harry Weber Jr., who also passed away in February. A moment of silence, please. Thank you. I'd like to start my comments today by recognizing a few employees. The first is Port Authority's Director of Internal Audit, Maria Nickerson, who is retiring from Port Authority. Not jealous or anything. Maria joined us as an associate auditor in 2013 and has been the department director since 2018. Has it been almost 3 years? Almost 3 years, wow. During her career at Port Authority, Maria has been known for her attention to detail and professionalism, and has helped to maintain and improve the department's focus on improving Port Authority's business processes and internal controls. You are leaving the department in Hadiza Buhari's capable hands. You can't leave in 3 years. Not allowed. It's too hard on me. On behalf of Mike Setter and our entire management team, Maria, thank you. We miss you already, and we wish you all the best. And to commemorate your hard work and dedication, I'm going to present you with a plaque with my mask on, and then we'll take pictures later. So let's see where our plaque is. So applause, everyone, please. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Maria. I'd also like to recognize someone else who's only been a director for 3 years, Dale Knutson, who joined us in 2018 to establish the Port Authority University. He's only been with us a few years. He will be staying in Pittsburgh. Dale has over 30 years in public transit and is retiring. It's too stressful, he says. he's going to go back to driving buses. His sense of humor, his anecdotes, his work ethic, and his extremely flashy sweater collection will absolutely be missed by everyone at Port Authority. I believe Dale is off-site, and if you're watching, Dale, we miss you already as well. And last but not least, I'd like to recognize Port Authority Police Officer Nick Massey, who on March 7th was dispatched to a bus for the report of a passenger who fainted but was conscious and alert. When the Officer Massey arrived, the passenger was unresponsive and had no pulse. Officer Massey performed CPR and was able to revive her before the paramedics came and got her to the hospital. Officer Massey will be apt to say it was just part of his job, but his actions most likely saved this person's life. And for that, we as well as she are very, very grateful. So to Officer Massey. Finally today, we are asking the board for permission to open a 40-day public comment period to consider changes to our current fare structure. So for folks who are participating in our board meeting today, speaking on fare changes, they will speak after me before the board votes. This is our standard procedure when people are addressing issues which are coming up for board consideration. The board is required by our policies and federal regulations to approve a public hearing process for fare changes. And we are including what is required in in the hearing process, but we are also having a broader conversation on fares. Just for some background, our last fare increase was in 2012. The last fare change in 2017, getting rid of zones, was an overall fare decrease. This time, we are proposing to eliminate the 25-cent stored value discount that's been in place since the implementation of the Connect cards. Eliminate transfers by turning your single tap into a 3-hour pass for $2.75 and making weekly and monthly passes rolling, which means it'll expire in 7 days or 31 days as opposed to the first of the month. Get your pass going on Wednesday, the 17th, and it's good if it's weekly till the next Tuesday, and if it's a 31-day pass, it's good till the middle of the next month. As this process begins, I want to assure you that we are listening. I think we've shown in the past few years that Port Authority is going out. We want to hear from folks. We have modified a lot of proposals based on what we've heard back from people. So we are absolutely in this process with open ears. Whether to make modifications on large impacts that have thousands and millions of dollars to them, or just a way that we can get you around your network. You'll get tired of me saying it. This is not Port Authority's system. It's the community system. We just run it. We need to hear from you. The changes we're proposing meet the needs of our riders. They are not things that are massive and expansive that would take us a long time to implement. We believe these are programs that are improvements that can get concrete changes in the short term as we're talking about where the agency is going in the future. We absolutely need to look at our equity impacts. We understand that the changes proposed today are helpful for people who can run an account or get to a ticket vending machine. There are a lot of people interfacing with Port Authority that still use cash. Pre-pandemic, 8% of our users were using cash every day. So of over 200,000 bus trips, that was 16,000 trips that were cash. Changes to a pass program do not help these folks, and we still need to figure out ways to get to fare mechanisms that are so ubiquitous that any cash holder can walk out and get their pass before they come anywhere near a bus. That remains a goal for us, and we're going to continue to work on that. We believe that getting rid of the transfer and going to a 3-hour pass can address the needs of the over 90% of our patrons who travel in 3-hour blocks. We have heard a lot of anecdotes of a mom who wants to get groceries, and the closest store or the store that that person prefers requires a transfer. Right now, that person will pay $3.50 going and $3.50 coming home if they have a Connect card, and it's $11 in cash. With the new $2.75 3-hour pass, simplifies it for the person who can get to the pass, and we will still be looking for ways to get these passes in cash holder hands. Simplifies our fares by going to the rolling passes. So if a visitor comes into town and they only need a 7-day pass, they don't have to wait till a Monday. More importantly, if your paycheck comes in every 2 weeks, or your paycheck comes in on the 5th, or whatever your resources are made available to you anytime but the 1st, now you can get the pass at a time that is convenient to you. And these changes meet our needs too by helping provide financial stability, particularly considering the events of the past year, helping us keep in line with a fair recovery level that is observed by PennDOT and set under various performance measures. Helps tie our fares a little bit to the pace of inflation. I want to stress the single fare for a cash paying person does not change at all. So it's been the same since at least 2012. And our monthly, weekly, and annual pass prices are not changing either. So again, 9 years we've had these same prices. And these are changes that represent tangible improvements to our current system. Based on feedback we get from our community, we can implement these by the end of this year based on the technology that we've got. Probably faster than that. So these are things we can get out the door, and we know that they're going to make an actual impact on people's daily lives. Again, most of our riders travel within these 3-hour windows. We do understand that there's folks who will have times where they don't just do the 3-hour window. So again, we're focusing on how to get the day pass out into our communities more broadly. Now, we're well aware there are fare options beyond what's been proposed, and there are definitely shortcomings beyond what we're proposing in this. We again, need to continue to focus on our cash paying customers and making things easier for them. And we need to have fares which folks can rely on so they know that they can make these changes to how they travel and their fare is going to be constant and not fluctuating. We're also continuing to look at various technologies which are out there. There is a lot of interesting stuff, really great stuff that is available in the app, which we are piloting for our smartphones. If you don't have a smartphone, you should be able to get to the same type of improvement. It shouldn't be a barrier to equitable transit. So we continue to look at ways that our technology can be updated and modified so everyone can get these improvements. Some of these options are a little more complicated. Some are very long and time-consuming options, and some are pretty expensive, but we have looked at a whole bunch of options and want to share those with you. It's important to know that this is the beginning of the conversation. We had ideally last year gone out with our next transit meetings and wanted to talk about fares, and then COVID. So we understand for a lot of people, this is the first conversation that Port Authority's had with them about fares since 2012. It's just the beginning of this conversation. We want to hear from you over the next 40 days. We are committed to making our fares more equitable, flexible, and more useful overall. So in the next 40 days, please reach out to us. We'll have a whole bunch of different ways that we can hear from you. We want to answer your questions before we culminate with our final public hearing on May 5th. Post that public hearing, we'll compile all of the comment into the public record, and we'll come back to our board for recommendations and for further action. Chair Letwin, unless there are any questions, that concludes my remarks.
Are there any questions? Okay, thanks, Catherine. We're going to open it up to public comment now, as Catherine said, changing the order in an effort to give everybody a chance to address the board before the vote. I'll remind everybody that there's a time limit, 3 minutes for speakers, except for an organization gets 5 minutes, which they can divide among speakers. And our first speaker this morning is Laura Weens from Pittsburghers for Public Transit.
Hi, thank you very much. So I'll just dive right into it. Fares are such an important issue for riders, right? They are the gateway for access, not just to transit, but to all the critical destinations we travel to on transit. And over the last several years, PPT, along with several organizational partners who will speak today, and transit riders have worked hard to identify priority improvements to the Port Authority's fare structure that would make the system more equitable. And we also developed recommendations around fare payment processes, fare enforcement, and fare incentive programs to grow ridership and shift the burden of cost to corporations and institutions who are disproportionately benefiting from our transit without paying in. I understand that today the board is merely voting on opening a public comment period to allow the public to respond to the 3 fare change recommendations that you're proposing today. And we are unequivocally supportive of rolling bus passes and free transfers on Connect cards. Indeed, these were 2 of the policy changes we suggested when the process began and which we presented to you as part of our Fair Fares platform on last year's Transit Equity Day. But after more than 2 years and in the wake of a global pandemic and economic depression that has hit transit riders more severely than almost any other demographic, we need more substantial progress. I'm heartened to hear Ms. Kellerman's remarks about the issue with cash fares. Cash riders are disproportionately very low income residents of Allegheny County and are more likely to have to make multiple transfers to get to key destinations like Oakland and downtown. Before the pandemic, we heard that they made up 8% of total ridership, but they were paying 15% of Port Authority's fare revenue. And I would bet that cash ridership as a percentage of total ridership has gone up significantly during this pandemic. Our fare system by design is charging more for fares for very low income people while simultaneously providing a worse service for them. There's inadequate Connect card machine infrastructure in the poor suburbs, and we've charged a 25-cent penalty on those residents who are forced to pay with cash and required those riders to pay full fares for the transfers that they have no choice but to take given the lack of service in outlying areas. Under this proposal, there will be no redress for these folks who continue to be the most harmed, except for the bittersweet knowledge that Connect card users will see their base fares increase as well. What about fare capping, which was touted as a likely major improvement to accompany the mobile app? What about bulk bus passes to sell to developers, corporations, conferences, and social service agencies to bring more riders and revenue to transit at a time when ridership is at an all-time low? And finally, where was the public process that led to these recommendations? You've shown the capacity of the agency to do robust public engagement, even through the pandemic, with your next transit planning. So yes, pass the free transfers for Connect card users. That is important and significant, will positively impact the lives of many riders and make our transit system more legible as well. Don't raise the base fares during a pandemic, for God's sakes, in one of the most expensive transit systems in the country. Pass the emergency fare relief program, allow SNAP riders to show their access cards to board to address the overwhelming need that exists now. And please take this comment period to hear and consider further long overdue fare changes and to open up a new comment period following this one to finish the work that you've begun. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Weens. Okay, our next speaker is Sam Applefield from Pittsburgh Food Policy Council.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today. My name is Sam Applefield. I'm a project manager with the Pittsburgh Food Policy Council. The Food Policy Council represents a network of over 100 different food systems entities, including farmers, restaurant owners, anti-hunger organizations, hospitals, universities, and many others. Together, we work to create a just, equitable, and sustainable food system. In the fall of 2020, we released the Greater Pittsburgh Food Action Plan, the first comprehensive food systems plan for our region. This was a deeply collaborative and community-based effort with input from over 600 county residents and 100 food system stakeholders. Throughout this process, which included community engagement sessions, an online survey, and thematic roundtable conversations, we heard over and over again about the transportation challenges in accessing food. In fact, during our 8 community engagement sessions, when asked, what are the top priority concerns you have relating to food, transportation emerged as the top concern, with the affordability or lack thereof mentioned frequently. While we were happy to see the free transfers and a rolling time frame for weekly passes included in the recently released fare recommendations, we were deeply disappointed at the lack of effort to make public transit more affordable. Especially given the economic hardship brought by the pandemic, there is an urgent need to make transportation more affordable, particularly for low-income riders. Doing so offers critical public health benefits. As the Allegheny County Health Department wrote in a recent white paper on the relationship between public health and transportation, quote, residents must be able to afford transportation options. Affordability refers to reduced financial burdens, particularly for lower income households. This supports public health in several ways. It leaves households with more money to purchase goods required for health, such as adequate shelter, healthy food, and medical care, and it reduces emotional stresses associated with poverty, end quote. I would add that the ability to access COVID testing and vaccine sites now adds an additional public health benefit to a low-income fare program. It is estimated that the implementation of a low-income fare program would cost between $4 to $8 million per year. This is a fraction of the over $500 million that Port Authority has received over multiple rounds of federal stimulus funding. A low-income fare program is also estimated to boost ridership by up to 1.2 million trips per year, an increase which is greatly needed given the low ridership levels currently. In closing, I strongly encourage you to adopt a low-income fare program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Applefield. And with that, we move on to Dana Donley from Just Harvest. Donley from Just Harvest.
That's okay. It's Donley. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for acknowledging that cash-paying individuals are not currently being served by any of these recommendations. And I am happy to hear that this is the beginning of a conversation. So today, thank you very much for hearing us all out. My name is Dana Dolney. I am the grassroots organizer at Just Harvest, a nonprofit organization that has been addressing the root causes of hunger in Allegheny County for more than 30 years. Just Harvest is deeply concerned with the Port Authority's new recommendations on fare restructuring. They fail to address key issues of equity, access, and the transit system's sustainability that we and so many others brought forward when this process began over 2 years ago. These recommendations will not close the gaps and disparities that have only grown during this pandemic, especially for lower income families and communities of color. In June, we spoke to you on behalf of the people we serve, whose numbers have grown even larger than they did during the last economic crisis, the Great Recession. At that time, we asked you to help make Port Authority a creative problem solver and to show leadership during the crisis. Almost a year later, we are still receiving endless calls from folks who have not had income for months, who are just trying to figure out how to meet their most basic needs. And one of those most pressing needs is transportation. They need affordable access to transportation, to get to possible job opportunities, to get the vaccine, to get food at a grocery store to feed their families. Home health aides and nursing home workers, they've endured endless tragedies and illness during this time, and many are still not safe. Essential workers, folks who are employed at low-wage work as cashiers and stockers, restaurant workers, they're clinging to their jobs on the front line right now. And for many of them, public transit is their only way to get to these jobs, taking care of so many of us and serving us and our loved ones. The hardest hit folks are still seeing increases in other costs too, while hours and wages decrease or they've lost their jobs altogether. Rent is still due, utilities for many are still due, kids need to be taken to daycare or learning centers, and food prices are rising. We appreciate the improvements of free transfers for 3 hours on the card and the rolling timeline. But for low-income people who make up a significant percentage of your ridership, the new Port Authority recommendations entirely miss the mark. These changes won't help those who rely on cash fares and cannot get and do not even have access to Connect cards, especially in low-income areas that depend on public transit. They can't make use of the 3 hour of free transfers you're proposing. There are no savings for them. There is no assistance, no equity in these proposals for those that need the help the most. They still can't gather together the money to pay in advance to enjoy the discount that weekly, monthly, and yearly passes offer. Fare capping, one of the things that the consultant set out to explicitly address, is nowhere to be found as a solution because it is said to be too technologically difficult to do. After 2.5 years, we deserve better answers and solutions than that. These recommendations can and must be better. Please recognize how transit is integral to public health. Improving transit access for those that need it most will only strengthen the transit system and all the systems and communities that rely upon it. Today, we want to encourage you to hold more hearings and to include more of our prior suggestions and recommendations to address a number of the needs not meant or mentioned.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will move on to Andrew Hussein. Andrew, are you here today? Okay, Andrew's not here. We will go on to Laura Perkins, representing Casa San Jose.
Good morning. My name is Laura Perkins. I work at Casa San Jose. We're a Pittsburgh-based community resource center that advocates for and empowers Latinos by promoting integration and self-sufficiency. As a bus and T rider myself, I'm very excited about the rolling timeline and the other proposals for the weekly and monthly passes. Casa San Jose, it is our pleasure to welcome many new families to Pittsburgh on a weekly basis. These people come to Pittsburgh seeking community, safety, work, opportunity, and a better future for their families. As they wait for their immigration papers to go through, most are not allowed to access to a driver's license under current Pennsylvania law. That means that our community are dependent on public transportation. Casa San Jose works with the newly arrived families to orient them to their new city, including our transit system. Newly arrived families face many barriers, and we at Casa San Jose feel that none of them have been addressed with this current proposal. Firstly, most of our community members don't have credit cards or bank accounts. They pay for public transit primarily using cash. This proposal does not address any of these barriers for new riders. That's both immigrants and people that use primarily cash. Number two, if you want to encourage more people to use Connect cards, we need more Connect card machines in our communities. We've been asking for a machine in B2 for years, and that would greatly affect ridership with our community. Number 3, another barrier to Connect Card usage is language access and technological literacy. Making a process dependent on technology will inevitably exclude our older and immigrant residents. I mention these barriers because I believe this extremely limited proposal misses the mark in being inclusive of our most low-income communities. We are disappointed in this proposal and request accessible listening sessions with clear plans for follow-up and integration of community feedback into the proposal. We echo the comments of our allies at Pittsburghers for Public Transit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Perkins. And with that, we'll move on to Keena James for the Alliance for Police Accountability. And Keena, I remind you that whatever time you use leaves only Brandy the remaining 5 minutes. So with that, you can begin. You need to unmute.
Yes, I'm the coalition organizer for the Alliance for Police Accountability. The Alliance for Police Accountability is a grassroots organization dedicated to criminal justice reconstruction, specializing in community and police relations. Our mission is to put an end to injustice within the criminal legal system through advocacy, education, and policy. We have been working with Pittsburghers for Public Transit, Casa San Jose, Just Harvest, and the Thomas Merton Center to advocate for a more equitable, fair policy at the Port Authority. We do this because many interactions with police often begin on public transit, and more specifically at the fare box. We make public transit safer by making it easier to access. From that point of view, we at the Alliance for Police Accountability are encouraged that the Port Authority wants to start free transfers and rolling passes. These changes will make it easier for some people to ride transit and decrease the potential for police interactions. However, it is important for me to point out that only some people will benefit from these policies. This proposal does nothing to support people who need to pay with cash, and thank you again for acknowledging that. These people often are the poorest of Port Authority's riders, and it is the poor who are disproportionately forced into police interactions. As a person who takes transit to work every day and pays with cash, I often find myself paying more than the monthly bus pass because I can't afford $97 all at once. Port Authority can help its poorest riders by making it easier for them to access transit too. With low-income fare programs, more Connect cards, fare capping, and other fare policies. Additionally, we can make transit easier, safer, and more equitable for all users by further examining Port Authority's fare enforcement policy. That means using civilian, multilingual fare ambassadors instead of armed police. Decriminalizing public transit, getting people resources instead of weighing them down with penalties. With today's proposal, Port Authority is gesturing in the right direction, but those who are most in need are not helped by these proposals. We must move quickly to pass free transfers and rolling passes for Connect card users so that we can continue the conversation. We need to have a full public dialogue about fare costs, incentives, and enforcement so that we can make it easier and safer for all riders to access transit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. Brandy Fisher, you have 2.5 minutes. Brandy? Is she joining?
Yeah, I don't think Brandy's here today.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for the public comments. And with that, we're going to move into the reports of the committees. The first being the report of the Performance and Oversight Committee from our chair, Michelle Zamanek.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you. The Performance Oversight Committee met virtually last week, and I have one resolution for your consideration this morning. The committee reviewed 3 procurement items and determined the bids to be in accordance with the authority's procurement policies and procedures, and prices fair and reasonable, the bidders to be responsible, and the bids responsive. The Performance Oversight Committee recommends the award of bids listed in the resolution for the total amount of approximately $2.1 million. My fellow members, I respectfully request that the board approve this resolution.
I have a motion. I guess Senator Brewster, will you make that motion?
So moved.
Jessica, could you second it?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries.
Mr. Chair, that concludes my report. Thank you, everyone.
That's a record for the shortest P&O report of all time, even when I chaired it. Okay, then with that, we'll move on to the report of the Planning and Stakeholder Relations Committee from our chair, John Tague.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, fellow board members and riders. The Planning and Stakeholders Relations Committee met last week. I have several updates for the board along with a resolution. The first is art policy. Breen Mastriota, manager of transit-oriented communities, gave the committee a presentation on the Port Authority adopting an art policy and how the agency would benefit from having one. Art is important to transit because it improves the customer experience, encourages ridership, improves the perception of transit, enhances community livability, deters vandalism, increases safety and security. Having an art policy would set expectations for review, consideration, and approval of adding or removing art on Port Authority property. The policy would govern art at stations and facilities owned by the Port Authority, provide transparency and uniform process, authorize creation of an arts committee to advise the CEO, authorize staff to issue guidelines for permanent art, temporary art, and removal of art. If the board approves to adopt an art policy, which the Planning and Stakeholders Relations Committee is recommending, the Port Authority can form an official art program. Mr. Chairman, I'm respectfully requesting authorization to adopt an art policy.
Mr. Dewan, would you make that motion?
So moved.
Anna Gork, would you second it?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries.
The policy would become effective April 1st. Full program implementation is yet to be determined. Next, an update on Next Transit Long Range Plan. Amy Silverman, Director of Planning, provided an update on Next Transit. The project is currently in Themes 4, which investments are most important. Through extensive data collection and public participation, we heard where transit projects are most needed, and we have turned that into a list of proposed projects, policies, and programs which are listed in the project's website, which is nexttransit.network. Public engagement for Theme 4 kicked off about a month ago, and Amy provided an update on engagement so far. 4 public meetings, 11 meetings we've attended by invitation from our stakeholder organizations, 600 plus attendees across the 15 meetings, 600 survey responses. Paper surveys are at the downtown service center and at some select bus stops in areas where we didn't immediately see zip code responses to the survey. These surveys will be available until April 2nd. The next steps will be continuing to attend our stakeholders organization meetings where we've been invited to speak about the project. Through the rest of the March project cost benefit analysis, priorities, more public engagement through the spring, and finally a draft plan this coming summer. The Committee on Accessible Transportation, CAT, on March 24th, the Port Authority held a special meeting for members of the CAT and the City County Task Force on Disabilities to provide the groups with an overview of the Port Authority's next transit project. The next CAT meeting is scheduled for May 6th using Microsoft Teams. The Allegheny County Transit Council on March 24th held their general council meeting. The council was provided with an overview of the next transit project along with general updates on items of interest. The next council meeting is scheduled for April 21st using Microsoft Teams. More information about upcoming meeting dates for CAT and ACTC can be found on the Port Authority website. If there are no questions, that concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are there any questions? Okay, then with that, we'll move on to the report of the Finance Committee from the Chair, Ann O'Gorick.
Good morning, Chair and fellow board members. The Finance Committee met on Thursday, March 18th, and I have 3 resolutions for your consideration. First, Chief Executive Officer Catherine Kellerman reviewed the FAIR policy work of FAIR consultant 49's Technologies. She summarized the items 49's Technologies reviewed on industry best practices and the components of the Title VI review that is a requirement of the Federal Transit Administration with any FAIR change. In addition, Ms. Kellerman reviewed the items that are being recommended to the board by management for public comment at this time, including the establishment of a 3-hour pass for $2.75 via the elimination of the $1 transfer charge and the elimination of the 25-cent stored value discount and the creation of rolling monthly and weekly passes. Chief Financial Officer Peter Schenck presented a resolution for authorization to proceed to a public comment period for the FY 2022 proposed FAIR policy changes. The comment period would be from March 26th to May 5th and include a formal public hearing. During the public comment period, members of the public will be able to provide comment on the proposed FAIR policies outlined in Exhibit A to the resolution. My fellow members, I respectfully request the board approve this resolution.
Austin, can you make that motion?
So moved.
Jen, can you second it?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? None? Okay, that motion carries.
Mr. Schenck presented a second resolution to amend and extend an agreement with Brinks US for armored car and cash management services. In January 2017, the board authorized a 3-year agreement award to Brinks for a total not to exceed amount of $3.5 million, with 2 additional option years at the authority's sole discretion. In April 2020, the board exercised the first option year until May 4th, 2021, and increased the not to exceed amount to $4,268,600. The services provided by Brinks under the contract have been satisfactory. The Finance Committee recommends approval of the second option year, which would expire May 4th, 2022, and increase the total not to exceed amount by $743,400 to pay for the services during the additional year of the agreement. My fellow members, I respectfully request the board approve this resolution.
Stephanie, can you make that motion?
So moved.
Michelle, can you second it?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you. Chief Legal Officer Michael Setra presented a third resolution to the committee seeking authorization for Port Authority to enter into a second agreement to the funding agreement with the Stadium Authority of the City of Pittsburgh. On April 1st, 2015, Port Authority and the Stadium Authority entered into a 5-year agreement for the North Side T Station free fares. On November 1st, 2019, the agreement was extended 1 year from April 1, 2020 through March 31st, 2020. Since March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic has adversely impacted utilization of the Stadium Authority garages and lots on the North Shore. The parties have negotiated a 1-year extension for $265,000, but the Stadium Authority would not resume payments until 90% utilization of its North Shore garages and lots is met for 3 consecutive months. In the interim, Port Authority will utilize CARES Act funding to make up the revenue loss because it is directly attributable to the pandemic. My fellow members, I respectfully request the board approve this resolution.
Jerry, can you make that resolution?
So moved.
Jessica, could you second it?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries.
Chief Financial Officer Peter Shank then reported on the February 2021 financial statements. He reported that total operating income for the month of February was $5.5 million under budget. Through February, total operating income is $44.7 million below budget. Every operating income category was below budget for the month and on a fiscal year-to-date perspective due to the pandemic. Lower passenger revenues and access program service revenues constitute the majority of this shortfall. Total expenses for the month of February were $3.9 million under budget and $31.7 million under budget for the fiscal year. Mr. Shank reported that if these trends continue, the authority wouldn't have to use any deferred revenues for operating purposes and may even have limited CARES Act funds remaining to be utilized next fiscal year. Total subsidy for the month of February was $11.4 million under budget due to lower local tax subsidy and no deferred revenue recognition. Total subsidy for the fiscal year was $1.4 million over budget and should continue to be over budget as CARES Act funds are recognized to offset passenger revenues. Mr. Shank reported that the authority ended February with approximately $136.5 million in operating reserves. Mr. Chairman, unless there are any other questions, that concludes my report.
Are there any questions? Great. Thank you, Ann. Okay.
Thanks.
With that, we'll move on to new business. I do have an item of new business to bring to the board. As you know, when we negotiated Catherine's contract to join us originally, she had enough confidence in tying her entire compensation to her performance, as opposed to getting automatic increases like many contracts can include. Her performance this year, I think, has been phenomenal given the challenges that we had throughout 2020. And on that basis, her contract provides for up to 10% of her base salary based upon the targets that we've created for her. We've gone through that analysis. We feel that she's pretty much met all those targets. And on that basis, we have a resolution to adopt awarding her $21,908 performance bonus based upon her performance this year. That's the motion coming from the chair. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Congratulations, Catherine, and we really do appreciate the job that you did this year, as you've done in every year. And with that, is there any other new business to come before the board? Okay, I'll remind everybody that our next regular meeting is April 23rd. I look forward to seeing everybody, and with that, we will stand adjourned. Take care, be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.